This is the IBJ podcast for the week of August the 5th, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. The footprint of the Indiana Pacers on the southeast side of downtown Indianapolis would correspond generally with a size 6,329 athletic shoe. Gainbridge Fieldhouse actually is owned by the Marion County's Capital Improvement Board, which owns most of downtown's major sports and convention facilities. But there's no doubt that its primary occupants are the Indiana Pacers and Indiana Fever, both owned to a large degree by real estate developer Herb Simon and his family. And parenthetically, I'll remind you here that billionaire businessman Steve Rales has a minority stake in the Pacers. But in recent years, the Simon family's real estate holdings near and immediately adjacent to the Fieldhouse have grown by leaps and bounds. We're beginning to see the outlines of a critical mass of hospitality and entertainment properties controlled by the Simons that could balloon to even greater size if the Simons are involved, as they are widely believed to be, in plans to bring a Major League Soccer team to Indianapolis. It would play in an arena to be built just a couple of blocks east of Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and almost certainly would use a large parcel of land recently purchased by the Simons. IBJ sports, hospitality, and real estate reporter Mickey Shuey has been on top of these developments for several years and is the man who can help us connect the dots. In his latest reporting, he has details on plans from the Simons to create a $300 million luxury hotel and concert venue complex directly across Pennsylvania Street from the Fieldhouse. Mickey joins us for this week's edition of the podcast so we can take stock of the Simons' current and planned investments and how they could form a cohesive entertainment and hospitality ecosystem, if you will, on downtown southeast side. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Mickey Shuey, who covers real estate, sports, and tourism for the IBJ. Thanks for making time today.
Thanks for having me again.
So this is the third time
yes, it is.
In the last 3 months that we'll be taking a deep dive into the southeast quadrant of the Mile Square downtown. Now, usually we're talking about the effort to bring a Major League Soccer team to Indianapolis and build a soccer stadium in that area. Today, our focus is on Herb Simon and his immediate family, who are believed to be involved in some yet-to-be-defined capacity with the soccer team and the stadium effort. But this is a much broader view of how the Simons are taking control of land around Gainbridge Fieldhouse and creating this critical mass of sports, hospitality, and entertainment projects. So to do this right, we need a little bit of context. Put on your real estate hat for a second, especially for folks who aren't from Indianapolis. Who is billionaire Herb Simon?
Well, Herb Simon and his brother Mel, they started out as shopping center developers who really created a retail real estate empire throughout Indianapolis in the 60s and 70s. In 1983, really at the urging of Mayor Bill Hudnut and a crew of civic leaders, they bought the struggling Indiana Pacers NBA franchise at that time for a cool $11 million.
Isn't that insane? There are houses in Indianapolis now that are worth more than the Pacers franchise.
Yes, but from there, they're really widely credited for keeping the Pacers in Indianapolis and really helping to stabilize downtown Indianapolis through that effort. So in 1999, the Pacers moved into their brand new home, Gainbridge Fieldhouse, then known as Conseco Fieldhouse, which is about 3 blocks southeast of Monument Circle. Before that, they played at Market Square Arena, which was on the east side of downtown. Now, a Simon affiliate, Pacer Sports Entertainment, manages the Fieldhouse for the public entity that owns it, which is known as the Capital Improvement Board of Marion County. It also owns Lucas Oil Stadium and manages that facility, and it also owns the Virginia Avenue Garage right next to Gainbridge Fieldhouse and Victory Field, where the Indians play.
And the Indiana Convention Center.
Yes, and the Indiana Convention Center. Can't forget that.
No, we can't. That and the weekend of Gen Con. So here we are, 41 years after the Simons bought the Pacers, 25 years after the Pacers moved into the Fieldhouse. Mel Simon, Herb's brother passed away in 2009, leaving Herb as the owner of the Pacers. Now, Herb is 89 years old now, and his eldest son, Steven, has been chosen to take over as majority owner of the Pacers when Herb passes away, which hopefully will be many years from now. Now, Mickey, as you've reported, there is no sign that the Simon family is interested in selling or moving the Pacers franchise.
Really, on the contrary. I mean, the Simon family is so committed to keeping the franchise in Indianapolis for decades to come that there's a stipulation in Herb's will related to that matter. What's more, the Pacers signed a 25-year deal with the Capital Improvement Board and the city as part of renovations to Gainbridge Fieldhouse a few years ago. And with that, there are some hefty fines in the event that the Pacers were to break that lease and go away. I should also note that Steve Simon told me in an interview last October when I sat down with him, quote, "We want to be long-term stewards of this franchise. Generationally, from Herb to us, there's nothing else on the table other than to see that continue," end quote.
Now, you can say that all you want. It doesn't mean that it actually will happen, though I was not aware of the provisions in the lease, which you told about. I mean, leases are made to be broken, I suppose. But the Simons have made some extraordinary investments in the last several years in the area around the Fieldhouse that could indicate that they're walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yeah, so as mentioned, the Fieldhouse got a big renovation a few years ago. That started a few years ago. It concluded just before the All-Star game, a few months before that, earlier this year. $400 million overall, most of that coming from the city and the state, CIB. But the Simons contributed $65 million to the renovation, including to the development of a new plaza space called Bicentennial Unity Plaza that sits where the Maryland Street Garage once was, just north of the Fieldhouse.
Yeah, there's an ice rink there, which during the summer is the basketball.
Yes, and actually this year they're trying out pickleball there, some
You're joking.
Roller skating. Yeah, they're trying a bunch of different things out there. They're really trying to make it a public amenity in many ways. But with that, as part of this renovation, the Simons also created a dining and entertainment complex immediately adjacent to the Fieldhouse and to the plaza, really sitting where there was once a parking lot right next to Gainbridge Fieldhouse across from the Virginia Avenue garage. That's called Commission Row, and it has a high-end dining room as well as a speakeasy called Mel's in honor of Mel Simon, and then an event space that can fit about 250 people. Now, the Simons have tagged that as being about a $20 million project, but we're not sure if that was before or after all the construction inflation that happened over the past few years. That was a number that they gave us back in, I think it was 21, 22. So we don't know how much that shifted since then.
And that $20 million, alleged $20 million, is apart from the $65 million that they invested in the Fieldhouse.
Right. That's understanding is that they invested $65 million in the Fieldhouse, and then they took on a couple other projects as well.
So then in May, IBJ reported the Simon family had just paid $10 million to buy a parking lot 2 blocks east of the Fieldhouse that, perhaps coincidentally, would be a key parcel in the plans to build the soccer stadium for a Major League Soccer team. And as you and I have discussed, the Simon family is not connecting the dots at all between their interests and whoever the investors might be in the soccer team.
Exactly. I mean, for their part, the Simon family says that its interest in the lot, quote, predated soccer, end quote, and that the acquisition is entirely separate from the city's plans. In fact, it says that Pacer Sports Entertainment, which is technically the parent company of the Pacers and the Indiana Fever WNBA team, they wanted the lot for activities related to the Fieldhouse, such as parking for staff and for television broadcast vehicles.
Obviously, that doesn't preclude them from also using the lot for some kind of use related to a soccer stadium. But I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of all this sooner rather than later. That brings us to what appears to be the family's biggest investment yet in the area immediately around the Fieldhouse. And this involves a large property just across the street from Gainbridge at the southwest corner of Pennsylvania and Georgia Street.
Yeah, so this is the building that's known as the CSX building is also known as the Indiana Terminal Warehouse historically. It's 5 stories tall and about 101 years old. And a Simon subsidiary called Boxcar Development purchased it in 2022 for $12 million. We had IBJ reported last month that the family has refined its plans for that property. Initially, it wanted to build like a super tall apartment and hotel pair of towers on the site. But now it wants to spend at least $300 million to construct a 13-story luxury hotel, which would have the Detroit-based Shinola brand. And it would also build a connected 4,000-seat theater on the property, with plans to open both venues by 2027.
I just quickly want to make sure I get that right. It is Shinola. Is that correct?
That's how they pronounce it.
My props to them for the edgy naming of their hotel. Yeah, it's a beautiful hotel. Yeah, they have one in Detroit. Yeah, very high end, kind of boutique style hotel. Do we know how many rooms the hotel would have?
So right now it's expected to have about 170. Certainly designs are still underway, so that might shift a little bit. But typically when they have hotels, I've come to find that when they say a number, they typically stick pretty close to that figure.
Now, is that a significant number of rooms? And for people who are not interested in this or don't know this market, in the context of downtown, does 170 move the needle?
Not really. I mean, there's over 8,300 rooms in downtown Indianapolis now, with another 800 set to come online in 2026 with the opening of the Signia project just a few blocks west. I mean, you've also got a few other hotels that are in the works, although most of the projects that were underway have essentially stalled out since the pandemic. But I mean, you've got a few other hotels, but 170 is not a major number. It's more about the brand that it represents and the overall project that it's part of.
And there already are 2 hotels that have been built across Pennsylvania Street from Gainbridge, which will also be across the street from the Shinola Hotel. The Hyatt Place and the Hyatt House, which is like 2 different kinds of brands, all run by Hyatt. So is the new hotel going to give our market or give that general vicinity something new?
Yeah, so there's an expectation that this new hotel would be super high-end. Think the Conrad, the Intercontinental, the Alexander on South Delaware Street. It's more in line with those type of products than your standard hotel fare. You should also note that there's another hotel project separate from anything the Simons have going on planned for the southwest corner of Pennsylvania and Maryland Street, catty corner to the Fieldhouse. That's also underway. So we'll see where things go with that one.
This is interesting. Now that you mentioned the Conrad, it was my understanding, or at least I always have believed, that when NBA teams come to Indianapolis, they stay at the Conrad. Is it a possibility that the Pacers would instead use Boxcar Development, use the Shinola Hotel as like a place where they would deposit other NBA teams?
I think it would make sense for them to do that. I mean, heck, they're going to have a walkway over top Pennsylvania Street connecting the hotel to the venue. I mean, you never really know with these sorts of things, but I would not be surprised if they go to that direction.
Yeah, and this is totally conjecture on my part. But now that I think about it too, Gainbridge hosts dozens and dozens of mega wattage concerts during the year. I mean, I think famously Garth Brooks came and did like 7 consecutive nights at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, having, a hotel right across the street, actually with a dedicated bridge. I mean, I don't know if that makes it any more palatable for the people who would be performing at these events or their crews or what. But it seems like something that you'd want to play up if you're trying to attract somebody to that facility.
I think that they're still really early on in the process of figuring out exactly what this means for operations between the Fieldhouse and the hotel and entertainment venue, especially since Pacer Sports Entertainment itself will not be involved in the management of either the hotel or the event venue.
But they know somebody.
Yeah, I think they probably know a few names.
Okay. All right. Just curious. And tell me more about some of the amenities that are going to be in this hotel.
So the hotel is going to be a Shinola brand, as we touched on. And the Shinola would really be the hotelier second location after Detroit. And it's going to feature a mix of deluxe rooms and suites, as well as an upscale restaurant, a bar, and potentially a Shinola brand retail store, which specializes in high fashion merchandise like watches and handbags. Additionally, it would also have an indoor-outdoor terrace, meeting and event space, and 2 ballrooms and a boardroom. Overall, the building would be about 226,000 square feet, with that covered skywalk connecting the building to Gainbridge, as we just discussed.
Let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with the latest edition of the IBJ Podcast and my interview with reporter Mickey Shuey about the Simon family's growing investment around Gainbridge Fieldhouse. And then we haven't talked yet about really maybe the bigger surprise in this plan. It's for a 4,000-seat entertainment venue connected to the hotel. And I guess when you talk about putting up big stars, having that facility there also would work. Downtown already has a wide mix of venues to see music and other performances, from places that can seat like a couple hundred people to 60,000 people in Lucas Oil Stadium. Do we have a sense of why the Simons wanted to get involved in entertainment?
So the connection to know here is international event promoter Live Nation, which many people know from his connection to Ticketmaster over the past few years. And Patriot Sports Entertainment has been working with Live Nation on a regular basis for decades. I mean, the company has promoted huge concerts at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, which we should note can seat about 18,000 people for those events. And according to an attorney for the Simon family, they became open to the idea of incorporating this entertainment use after they learned that Live Nation was considering doing a project of its own somewhere downtown. At that point, they decided to scrap the apartment portion of the CSX site project in favor of this focus on entertainment and live performances.
So we mentioned the CSX building is 101 years old. And in addition, it's located in downtown's Warehouse District, which is a designated historic district. Can you just tear down any building you want downtown, or is there some sort of process that needs to be followed?
It's funny you ask that, Mason, because no, you can't just tear down a building that you want. In downtown Indianapolis, there are multiple historic districts, and a large portion of this property is located, as you mentioned, in the historic Warehouse District. Because of that, this project has to go through approvals from the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission. They have oversight on demolitions and on new construction in that area.
Tell me if I'm wrong. Just to cosmetic changes to buildings.
Yes. I mean, if you want to put a new facade on, if you want to change some windows out, you technically have to go through IHPC if you are located within one of those designated areas.
So that process is underway.
Yes. So this is set to go before the IHPC for essentially a preliminary review where the board doesn't vote on the matter, but they'll give feedback, and then the developer will go back to the drawing table with their designers, which I should note in this case is Ratio, and the president of the commission is Bill Brown, who is the key principal of Ratio. He will be recusing himself, I'm told, from any votes on this. It's happened before with Signia and a few other projects downtown, but they'll go before the commission in August, and then they'll likely be back in September to actually request approval. And at that point, the board would vote on this matter.
Yeah, and sometimes these things get delayed, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's basically the process.
Yes.
Let's look at some of Indianapolis's other entertainment venues. So we mentioned Lucas Oil, 60,000 seats. We're going to throw in Ruoff Music Center, even though it is, 30 miles to the north. It has been around forever. Obviously, it used to be known as Deer Creek. That's 6,000 under the canopy, and then 18,000 on the lawn. Gainbridge has 18,000 seats. Everwise Amphitheater at White River State Park, used to be called the Lawn at White River State Park, can seat 6,000 people between reserved seating and the Lawn. Now, there's Old National Center, 5 or 6 blocks away from Gainbridge, that can seat 2,600 in its theater. And then there's like standing room only concert venue, Egyptian Room, that can have 2,000 in it. Hilbert Circle Theater on the Circle has about 1,700 seats. That's a pretty good range. Is there really demand for a 4,000 seat venue?
Well, the way that Live Nation looks at it, there is, because it's important to know that perhaps the biggest quote unquote competitor in this space downtown to this venue would likely be Old National Center, given the size and the proximity to other things downtown. But the Live Nation group also manages that facility as well. So they wouldn't necessarily want to cannibalize their own product by building a new venue unless they truly felt it was necessary.
Do they manage it or do they just book it?
I believe they manage it.
Okay.
In addition to that, I mean, you've got that gap there between 2,600 and 6,000. I mean, it's not smack dab in the middle, but I mean, that's like 4,000 is right in between those. And it's also important to know, I mean, some acts that might go to Everwise in the summer, if they wanted to come here in the winter, I mean, this would fit that bill because you're not going to perform outside in 30-degree temperatures.
That's a good call.
So I think that Live Nation thinks that there's a need for it. I should note that the Indianapolis Arts Council is conducting essentially a survey and analysis of all of the city's music venues now to determine kind of where are the gaps and how could those be addressed. So that should be done by the end of this year, along with a separate survey focused on the needs that the community sees across central Indiana, where they would like to see the industry go.
What is the purpose of doing that? I mean, I don't think the Arts Council has like any kind of impact on whether or not this thing gets made. It's just as an advisory.
It's more of an advisory situation. They, as you mentioned, like they're not the ones necessarily making the decisions, but typically in situations where new venues or perhaps even new acts are being considered, they may be engaged and asked for counsel on that. Is this something that Indianapolis would actually find desirable? And I mean, in order to determine that, they need to go out and ask the questions, right?
Yeah. One thing that just occurred to me when we were talking about the Old National Center, which used to be called the Murat, the 2,600 seat theater, I believe, has a lot of restrictions to it. I mean, this is a historic building. So, I mean, there's not a lot you can do in terms of the seating that is already in there, the size of the stage. So, I mean, it would make sense that if you were going to build a slightly bigger theater, it would be a lot more flexible than the Old National Theater space. The Egyptian Room is, a free-for-all in a good way. I see a lot of great shows at the Egyptian Center. But, it just gives you more flexibility, I would assume.
So this entertainment venue that the Simons are planning, it's supposed to be about 87,000 square feet. The main level would basically be like unaffixed seating. It'd basically just be a blank slate, and they'd put down seats when they needed to have seating in there. Otherwise, it'd be kind of open. And then you would have 2 or 3 terraced levels above that would have fixed seating. So it makes it a lot more flexible for kind of the size and scope that different artists might be looking for.
So if we take a bird's eye view of the southeast quadrant of the mile square, it seems like we could almost draw a straight line from the planned CSX Live Nation venue, Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and then the site of the proposed soccer stadium, which is expected to have, I think, between 20,000 and 30,000 seats.
Yes.
And are there plans for the soccer stadium to host entertainment events?
Right now, it's a bit nebulous, but it seems like the phrase that's really echoing through the ether here is soccer first stadium. So certainly, that's what we're seeing in a lot of other cities like Columbus and Cincinnati, Nashville. They are soccer first facilities, but they're also equipped to host other events such as concerts or large gatherings. So I think it's fair to say that, especially since this would be a CIB-owned building, regardless of who manages it, CIBs want to get going to want to get the best bang for its buck with this investment. So I would expect that we're going to see more events hosted there.
So we end up potentially with this corridor of sports, entertainment, and restaurant venues that would all have some kind of connection to the Simon family. Again, we're assuming, as I doggedly wish to assume, that the Simons are somehow involved in the soccer project. Is there evidence of some kind of grand plan here by the Simons to create synergy between all of these properties?
I mean, really, the way that they're framing it is the Simons believe in downtown Indianapolis, so they believe it's worth the investment. And I think it's certainly fair to say that you can draw parallels between what's happening at Gainbridge and what they're doing with this new project at CSX. I mean, there's no way that it's unavoidable to kind of jump to that conclusion, because even as one of their attorneys pointed out, theoretically, somebody could go to dinner at Commission Row. They could then go to a game at Gainbridge Fieldhouse and then walk over to the entertainment venue, catch a late show, and then go back to Mel's Speakeasy to grab drinks afterward. I mean,
yeah, and you barely have to go outside.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of connectivity, a lot of, as you said, synergy between these spaces. So I think whether it's intentional or not, the effect is going to be that it's going to really build up this pocket of intrigue and entertainment in downtown Indianapolis in that southeastern quadrant.
So much of this, I guess by this, I mean the Simons' interest in property outside of Gainbridge Fieldhouse has happened since Steve Simon became a more visible influence on the Pacers. I forget exactly what the date was, but he sort of became introduced, if you will, as, you know, a future player in the future of the Pacers. I'm going to say 10 years ago. Do you think a lot of this activity is being driven by him or by Herb, or is this just a collective Pacers brain trust strategy?
I certainly think that all of these individuals in the Simon family, like, they have great business acumen and they have a lot of knowledge of Indianapolis. So I think certainly it could be Herb and perhaps to a greater extent Steven driving the car here, but certainly I think the Simon family as a whole probably sees value to building up its downtown empire, if you will, almost taking a similar approach to what Dan Gilbert up in Detroit has done with his interest in Detroit sports and real estate. They're kind of building up this district, if you will, that's going to pay dividends. I mean, there's a reason that people invest in real estate. And one of the individuals I spoke with for this story, Steve Sebesma, who actually helped create Deer Creek 30 years ago, he said that he understands this as an entertainment play, but more so he views it as a real estate play, because the more real estate they're going to control, the better for the Simon family.
So I'm going to return to my earlier thesis. This doesn't seem like the kind of behavior you'd seen from owners who are just interested in sitting on, you know, their investment in the team, or anticipate cashing out, or even moving the team. And I think that is interesting, because when you're dealing with a city government or a state government that potentially can provide you with incentives, or, you know, has some sort of control over your operations, in this case, the CIB owns Gainbridge Fieldhouse, it usually helps have some sort of implicit threat that you'd consider selling or moving the team. But the more that they invest in this area, it seems like that is less of a consideration to worry about.
Perhaps. I mean, it's important to note that Herb Simon, while he is a Democrat, he has good relationships across the board with politicians, and he's had that for 30, 40 years here in Indianapolis. I mean, he knows how to build these relationships, and I think perhaps more importantly, with the passing of Jim Morris a few weeks ago, this kind of came to the fore that it's not about making a threat. It's about showing what the family, what the Pacers, what this organization can offer the city, offer the state, if it's given more opportunities to do so.
Yeah, and Jim was a longtime Pacers executive,
and a really close friend of Herb Simon. And I think that's the way that they're going about it. It's not so much like, if you don't do this, we're going to leave, but more so, if we don't do this, we're not going to move forward as a city, as a state. It is important to note that this project is being considered for funding from the READY program, the state's regional basically regional cities' efforts. So it's not clear how much they might get for that, but it has been submitted to the state for that. But I mean, really, it's about leaning on those long-term relationships and perhaps not a threat, basically saying like, if we don't do this, we're not going to get better.
So the next thing we need to watch out for, you think, is the IHPC hearing and get more details, I think, about what is planned there.
Yep, that'll be on Wednesday, August the 7th. And I think you should expect a story from IBJ and 8 at 8 on that Thursday.
Right on. Okay, well, folks, there you go. Keep your eyes peeled at IBJ.com. Subscribe to 8 at 8 if you can. Thank you so much, Mickey. I appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for having me.
My thanks again to Mickey Shuey. And you can read more from Mickey about plans for the southeast side of downtown in the latest issue of IBJ. And before we get on with the rest of your week, there are a few other stories in the latest issue I want to draw to your attention. First up, Indiana's economy is on the verge of a high-tech makeover as leaders focus on snagging players from the semiconductor industry and other microelectronics. Unfortunately, few Hoosier workers have much expertise in the field. Kate Sharon explores efforts to meet the industry's workforce needs. Also in this week's issue, Daniel Bradley digs into a plan for a 260-acre development in Zionsville that could bring 700 new homes to once rural property. And in IBJ's Focus section, we have some tips for negotiating raises now that the economy has regained much of its strength. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at IBJ.com. And I will say it is quite a bit easier to access all of the latest business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business, community, and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months, just to get a sense of how valuable and original our content is. Just go to IBJ.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.